Okay, so now what are the factors that then determine, if this is clear, so if the logic is clear, then my question is, what are the factors that determine the choice of a firm to internalize a particular activity? These factors can be of several nature. There can be industry-specific factors related, for instance, to the nature of the product and the markets, which leads to the internalization of market inputs and vertical integration. For instance, take again the example of the software company. In that case, if you work in the software sector, which implies you work in a sector in which there are lots of information asymmetries, because it's very difficult to understand the quality of a software and things like that. In that sector, of course, there are industry-specific factors that may affect the choice to internalize, because as we know, the higher are the larger are the information asymmetries, the more likely, the more convenient for you is to try to get access directly via foreign direct investments, via the acquisition of direct control of a particular assets, rather than using the markets. Because when information asymmetries are high, the price mechanism, the use of the price mechanism or the use of the markets in terms of transaction cost, the cost of using this is very high. Okay. On the contrary, in most standard sector, which are again the characteristics that is industry specific, in more traditional sectors, information asymmetries are lower, and in those cases, the cost of using the market mechanism is also lower. There are also region-specific factors. As again, takes the example of the Bangalore districts in India. The fact that there is this district with a lot of externalities going on, a lot of knowledge that is shared by software programmers locally, this also may affect the choice to internalize, because it can lower the costs associated with the transaction costs associated with undertaking the foreign direct investments. Or if you want to look at it from the benefit perspective, it increases the benefits of acquiring control of a company that is operating there, and therefore it makes foreign direct investments more convenient rather than, again, simply using the market mechanism. There can be, for the same reason, nation-specific factors. For instance, acquiring control of a company operating in a given region, in a given nation, due to institutional characteristics of the nation and things like that, may be also convenient. And also there can be firm-specific factors that reflects the firm ability to organize and manage internal operations. The most simple example is, it depends on how skilled are your managers. Okay? If you in your company, you have very skilled managers that are very good, the cost of coordination via managerial command, which implies the cost of the transaction cost associated with the foreign direct investment, is lower compared to a firm that instead has very bad managers or very unskilled managers. Okay, because of course the cognitive costs of the managers are important in defining the convenience of using coordination via managerial command rather than coordination via the price mechanism. Okay, I was just checking if you are still there. All of you left the virtual room, but you are still there. So okay, so if this is clear, okay, let me skip this and let me go to Dunning's framework. Okay, so that we manage to get near to the conclusion. So now this is it for the basic framework of the let's say transaction cost, the use of transaction cost in theory of multinational companies. The key idea is the idea of internalization costs. Okay, now Dunning's is an author who developed what is called Dunning's framework, which is an approach, a theory of multinational company that is not simply an adaptation of transaction costs economics, but it makes use of transaction costs in the theory. Okay, it's not the only factors, there are other factors, but transaction costs play an important role. So, and nowadays, Dunning's eclectic framework, although it was developed in the 1977, is still one of the mostly and most widely used theoretical approach to study multinational companies. And I will show you also an example of an empirical paper that people I know they just made. It was published in 2015. That is making direct use of this approach to try to study empirically the patterns of foreign direct investment. So it is interesting to be studied. Now, Dunning's approach it's a theory that deals with the firm and why it becomes a multinational. So it is just our problem. It is also concerned with trade to a certain extent, and it is interesting because it combines determinants of international production choices that are both micro and macro. Okay, and we will see what I mean by this. His main insights, in particular, is that if you want to build a proper theory, a realistic theory of foreign direct investments, you need to be able to explain at the same time both FDI and trade. Okay, you need to make a theory that can explain not only why firms undertake FDI, but also why firms do not undertake just trade in order to internationalize their business operation. Okay, and this is something that was shared, as we know, also by Vernon's business cycle approach, but it's also an important aspect that characterize Dunning's argument. So the main aim of Dunning's in developing his theory is basically to explain why a company decides to produce abroad, so why the firm decides to become a multinational company, how, meaning whether it uses foreign direct investments or other international activities such as, I don't know, subcontracting and things like that, and finally, where the foreign direct investments is likely to be directed. Okay, so it wants to explain at the same time these three dimensions. Okay, why a firm decides to expand its production activities abroad, why it uses foreign direct, in particular, how it decides to do that. So we want to explain why the company decides to use, in order to expand production activities, foreign direct investments rather than other solutions such as subcontracting. And finally, where the company is going to direct its foreign direct investments, in which country, in which region. Okay. Dunning explains this why, when, and where in terms of three types of advantages that can be associated with foreign direct investments: ownership advantage, location advantage, and internalization advantage. And here is where the internalization advantage is where transaction cost economics plays a role. Okay. For this reason, that is to say, the fact that this theory is based on these three types of advantages, Dunning's approach is also known as the OLI approach. Okay, O stands for ownership, L for location, and I for internalization. Now let's see briefly what are these types of advantages. And let's start with the ownership advantage. So what are the ownership advantages? Are basically the advantages that are specific to a particular firm. Okay, so they are specific. So if you take two different firms, even if they are in the same sector, if they produce the same product, but they are different for some reason, these two firms will have different types of ownership advantages. So they are specific of each single firm. In particular, they consist of the competitive advantages that this firm can have. And again, these competitive advantages can be very different. So some firms that can base their competitive advantages on the capability to produce a product at a very low costs, Some other firm can base their competitive advantages on the capability to produce a very high quality product. Okay, think about, I don't know, BMW and I don't know, or Porsche. Okay, and compare it to, I don't know, Fiat or Renault. Okay, of course the competitive advantages are based on very different factors.